Cosmic consciousness, extraterrestrials and UFOs, sacred geometry, ancient civilizations, spiritual connection, the quantum universe. All of these topics and so much more with your host, Sev Tuck, on Alien Spirit with Sev.
Hello, welcome to Alien Spirit. I'm Sev. Music. It produces a kind of pleasure that human nature cannot do without. That is a quote by Confucius. And today we're going to talk about music and its ability to help us transcend the physical, expand our consciousness, and to provide the proper environment to invite supernatural experiences. My guest is Mike Fiorito. He is a professor of English at the City University of New York. He is an award-winning author, freelance journalist, and musician, and he's written many books. I met Mike through his previous book, For All We Know, a UFO Manifesto, and now he has a new book, UFO Symphonic, Journeys into Sound. And this is made up of a variety of personal stories, people who've made contact with UFOs and ETs and have had supernatural experiences through music. So Mike is asking a really good question. Is music a form of contact modality? Please welcome Mike Fiorito.
Hey, Sev, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to see you. And that was
Mike,
a
it's
wonderful
a pleasure.
introduction. That was great. I loved it. It was just
Thank you.
perfect, everything.
Thank you very much. So let's just start off with where you
Yeah,
grew up and what you were interested in as a young person.
sure. I grew up in, it's called Long Island City, Queens, which is, it was a manufacturing area, probably had been for the past, say, 100 years, maybe. It was a little bit of a rough and tumble neighborhood when I was a kid. It's now this spectacular because it's right across the water from Manhattan. So you have a beautiful view of
Oh.
the Manhattan skyline. But it was a bit rough and tumble, like factories, abandoned factories, where of course I, hung out during cold winters and got in trouble and did that kind of stuff. Um, I was, if
Don't you talk
you've
about
read,
that? I'm sorry to cut you off, but don't you talk about the
please.
trouble you get into in this book? And for all we
I
know,
do.
yeah.
I do. I do. And it's, it's not all of it. It's certainly there's a lot that's based on truth. I wanted the latitude to have the freedom to say what I wanted to say. So and not everything is absolute truth. Sometimes as a writer too, you'll bring things together to make a composite story. So you don't have, anecdotal things. You just kind of have uh, one narrative that is easier to read and follow. Um, but I was always interested in science fiction. I was always interested in it was funny, and I have a story in the book. What's funny is I forget sometimes what I've written.
Uh-huh.
That I used to go to the library. It was the Ravenswood Library, and I would steal books. And this is before they had the magnetic detectors, so they would know if you're walking out with a book. Now I know it's an awful thing, and I'm certainly not promoting it, but I was a book hungry, and I don't think that has ever stopped. So I would go to the library. I'd find books on spaceships. Sometimes, awful to say, I would actually rip the pictures out. But it just fascinated me. The cosmos, spaceships. I shared with you pictures, and you and I talked a few months ago, and you kind of hit me with a revelation. If you remember that, because I showed you, I had a dream, and I don't remember the details of the dream. I often do write them down. I'd have to get my dream journal, but it was basically an abductee dream that I had, and then I showed you pictures illustrations I made when I was maybe 12, and they're
Yeah.
spaceships and details
Mhm,
of
mhm.
anti-gravity, technology. And this fascinated me. It just was very interesting to me. So um, I read Omni magazine. My father got me a subscription knowing that I
Mm,
was interested. And I would
mhm.
say that if you look at the cover of the books, For All We Know and UFO Symphonic, they reflect that era, that kind of era of what science fiction looked like. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, remember Discover magazine? Is that still around? That had that
I'm
kind
not
of
sure.
graphic too, I think. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it was
remember Omni. That was a really innovative magazine. I loved it.
it really was. I mean, you had science fiction, science fact. It was published by Bob Guccione, who ironically
Yeah.
published Penthouse magazine. But he had an aesthetic for beautiful pictures. There was great illustrations. The great science fiction writers of the time were published in Omni. Philip K. Dick and Ursula Le Guin, and it goes on. So, and I would say it was above my level because I'm 12 about. It's
Mm,
1978. I'm 12,
mhm.
and I'm reading the stuff that's a little bit more. The vocabulary and the concepts are a little bit above my head, but I reached up to grab it, and I would say that that really informed so much of what I was interested in. There, it was also a political. They had stuff about freedom of speech and freedom to publish and print what you want to print. So it was a kind of a, a compendium of different elements, which is something that stayed with me. I'm not a one trick pony, as you know. I tend to come at things from, I don't know, a couple of different angles.
Yes. I'd like to get into the book because you have so many
Sure.
good stories in here. So first, let's
Thank you.
talk about the chapter where let me oh, I want to try and find it. Where you talk about the Pope
Yes.
wanting to not use music. What was
Right.
that about?
Right. So it was it was a bit of, there was politics between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church, and uh, as had even this politics of aesthetics had played out even in the building of cathedrals. And the Protestant churches, the Gothic churches, had different structures, different architectural structures, like flying buttresses, more angular, triangular looking arches. And we look at these things now and say, gosh, they were arguing over this stuff, but they were. And this was even true in the music. So there was, at the time, Catholic music, church music, which was mostly vocal. And why would that be? Why would it be vocal? Because you could control, with an instrument, you may not get perfect pitch. It may go out of tune. The technologies weren't as good as they are today. A voice is as close to perfect as you could get. So at that time, the predominant Catholic uh, vocal style was Gregorian chant, which is monophonic. It means one voice. And you'll see there's a theme in the book. It's UFO symphonic, but a theme of the book is many voices, polyphonic. Like, I actually structure the chapters like a polyphonic mass,
Mm.
after the tradition of Palestrina. And so uh, the story is that, and I think I don't know if it's absolutely true. I'm not positive, but it's folklore. So the uh, the northern countries were playing with polyphonic styles. So what that means is, when you hear the Beatles sing, you hear John and Paul, they sing different notes and they sing different melodies, but together it has harmony. So that's the trick with polyphony, is that you're singing a different note, but like the chords to a piano or the chords to a guitar, together those notes fit and it makes it more beautiful. And so at the time, uh, Palestrina was saying, this polyphonic style is beautiful. We should embrace this. The church should embrace this. and the church was kind of against it. And so he wrote the Mass for Pope Marcelli, who was the Pope at the time, and to say, "Look how beautiful this music is." And then supposedly at the Council of Trent, um, polyphonic music was allowed to be written, composed, distributed, and performed. And so we have Palestrina to thank, because I think, and I wrote about this in the book too.
Mhm.
I sing, I play guitar. I'm amateurish. I mean, I thought I was going to be a rock star, man. At some time, but when I sing with my wife, and she'll do harmony parts, and she she has a very good instinct for harmonies. Like, I can do what they call thirds, and it's sort of like obvious. It's like, you know, it's less creative, but her harmonies are more interesting. They're just more, and it's chilling. So for me as a player,
Yeah.
even when I hear harmony, and as a
Yeah.
listener, it elevates the music. It makes it just makes it more beautiful, I think. And you think, rock and roll music, the Kinks, the Beatles, the Monkees, all of these groups, Crosby, Stills and Nash, they all used harmonies. And when I learned more about it, then I started to play with harmonies. And at first you feel like you're going to make a mistake and screw up, but if you keep at it, you get the confidence to do it. And I think I've gotten better at it. My instinct has gotten better. But that's the story
So,
behind Palestrina.
harmonizing isn't a natural talent?
Well, I think not everybody, certainly not everybody can do it like out of the
Mhm.
gate. Some people have an innate ability. People who, if you've gone to like gospel churches, there's a lot
Yes.
of that happening. If you go
Mhm.
to, if you're exposed at an early age to places where this is commonplace, um, you've had more
Oh,
practice, and you have more
right.
confidence, and you have more just
Mhm.
skilling on it.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, some people just can't do it. Even people that can sing, so they may be able to sing, but maybe
Mhm.
they haven't explored it. I'm not exactly sure.
Mhm.
But it makes music, many voices together. It makes music more beautiful harmonies. They just
Mhm.
elevate the emotional aspect of it. And I think that has a lot to do with what I started to investigate and study, and why I even wrote the book, if that makes sense.
Yes, and having those layers of harmonies also increases the frequency of the music too. So
Hmm.
it's energetically more powerful as well. Mhm.
There's
Now,
there's more going on. Yeah.
was there a defining moment in your life, an incident in your life, or a defining story that you heard from someone else that was like that aha moment? Is that, "Oh my gosh, it's music."
You know, that's a great question. I think, growing up, my best friend Lan and I, we were basically poor kids, lived in the projects. We would sit in the hallway. Now, the hallways, I don't know, people have different dwellings. People may have grown up in houses. Hallways are great places to do music, because you have this echo. You have like cement, and
Yeah.
it's like when you're in the bathroom or in the shower. Everybody sounds great in the shower, and we would like perform for each other, cold nights, and we would do the whole thing. We both played too. We both played. He played the drums, and I played guitar. And I had the courage to sing. I wasn't very good initially, I don't think, but I could do both. I could play and I could sing. So I became the default singer. But we did. Here's a defining moment. We at a talent show. Maybe I guess something like 12 or 13. I imitated Elvis Presley. So Lan he played the drums he would practice on a banana bicycle seat. That's how we practiced. And I didn't yet play the guitar. So here's the funny story, Seb. So we practiced every day. It was blue suede shoes. Well, it's one for money, two for the show. And
That
when
was
we
good.
get up there, and my mom she worked for a jeweler. And so, to my mom really like yucked it up for me. So I had a shirt, here I'm 12 years old, right? And a button like Elvis. So my chest is showing, and I wore like gold chains. And when I came out, and here you have a crowd. It was a Catholic school. I come out, I've had my back turned to the audience. I spin to begin the song. The microphone isn't on. And my mom and my dad and like for 2 seconds, like silence hung in the air. Oh no, he's this will damage him for life. So I looked at the microphone, and really there was someone came and helped me. Some angel tapped me on the shoulder, said, "Turn the microphone on." So I turned the microphone on, turned around. Well, it's one for the money, two for the show. And it was great. And in a way to indulge me as, imitating Elvis, you had people on it going, "Oh, Elvis, oh, Elvis."
Oh,
So,
yeah.
I mean,
It's
that's
so
pretty
cute.
defining. And I
Yeah.
mean, I remember it, distinctly. And, I had
So
an
it took
Elvis,
you I'm sorry.
yeah,
It's defining because it elevated your awareness. You had feelings in your body that you can't get doing something else. So what
yeah.
was the high? Can you describe the high?
Well,
It's like a high that you
that's a
felt.
great question. They say, I mean, if you go and look it up, there are research studies that music it increases your dopamine, and so you actually get high when you play and listen to music.
Mhm. Yeah.
And there are therapies um, that people suffering from PTSD, people suffering from disease, pain, that you can use music as a healing. I mean, it has a range, and we can get into that. Um, just as I'll mention, Stephen Halpern, who is a New Age, he's one of the founding fathers of New Age music, and he's been making music since I'm going to say like the 80s or something, and he actually makes music where it could be music for healing. And so he is very scientific about it. It's at a certain frequency. It's of a certain
Mhm.
kind. That there's certain rhythms or beats. Now his stuff, it's very ambient, so it's not necessarily like Pink Floyd. Um, he also does binaural beats. He makes music for binaural beats and stuff. By the way, I was introduced to him through mutual friends, and he read the book, and so his blurb is going to be on the final copy of the book. So I'm excited about that. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
really exciting. And he said, I stopped reading your book because he said, you're saying things that I'm thinking about, and I didn't want it to get in the way I want to write my own book. So I was like, oh my gosh, Stephen
Oh, I
Halpert read my
understand
book.
that.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Yes.
Isn't that cool?
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I think your point is, so yeah, there's that adrenaline rush. And even there's a few things. There's the sound of music, there's the experience of performing it, whether there's the experience of the audience, and all of that is necessary. I mean, I think, sure, there are people that could play in a room alone and just do that forever. But when you bring it out there, I talked to Sebastian D. Filippi. He's an Argentine composer and conductor, and he talks about the process of how he kind of communicates with these long dead composers and has to kind of get into their mind. And that's not the typical esoteric, it's not what we would typically think of esoteric, but it is esoteric. You're in communication with a mind, and you have to sort of, is this the way you expected? Is this how you would have done it? Is this where you would have focused? And all of that magic builds up to, from reading squiggles on a paper, to getting the musicians to work together, to performing and rehearsing it, to then having an audience that receives it. I mean, think of, that's pure magic happening
Mhm.
in broad daylight, or it could
Mhm.
be at night as well. um,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
thought that was so fascinating. And what was interesting, Sev, is that when I started to write the book, I had a kind of idea in mind, But as I started to talk to people, that shifted. It just kind of,
Mm.
you'll notice it's a UFO symphonic journeys into sound. It's not just music. So it could be, there's sound. It could, binaural beats, sound baths. I went to gong yoga, where you have extraordinary experiences that take you. You have a, you go into a hypnotic state. You have hypnagogic images materialize. You have conversations. You have interactions with. I'm not even presuming to say I'm not sure who, because I think, I may be getting ahead of my skids here. Part of what we're, when I talk about the unconscious, when I talk about dreaming, and when I talk about the visitors, the others, I just get this feeling that it's, when we're seeing them, we're seeing us. There's some aspect, there's this interconnectedness between, we're not separate. And whether they are a reflection of us, or we're tapping into this polyphonic, this many voices, when we enter states, whether it's through, a near death experience, whether it's through a chanting experience or a UFO experience, we're entering the world of many voices. And it's the opportunity. Now I realize, not everyone wants to enter that. Maybe it's too much, and you back off, or it's understandable. Um, I've been rereading Alexandra David Neal, and she went to Tibet long. This is like 1920s, I think she's writing Tibetan mysticism, and she's writing about the um, the initiates who went to lamaseries and to become monks and to become, you know, uh, basically a mystic. That could be kind of terrifying, to, you were opening yourself to spirits, to states of mind, states of consciousness. That takes a lot of, I mean, as you know, you're a practitioner. You've been involved in this work. I believe you've gone to the Monroe Institute.
I have not been, but I know
Oh,
of it.
you
Yes.
know of it. So
Mhm.
so it's interesting. I'm seeing the parallels between what a Tibetan initiate goes through, and to me, it's not unlike when we have experiences. The UFO is like a knock on the door. It's sort of like you have an experience,
Yeah.
and it may call you. Now, everyone sees it differently, and I'm not proposing to have the one absolute. It's the opportunity to sort of crack you out of the hypnosis of the matrix you're in, because we are all in a kind of, in a matrix. And it's the opportunity to say, well, something, how when you dream and you say, I write about this, things kind of, an object looks like it's kind of falling. You know, uh, an airplane doesn't fly right. The ceiling doesn't look just right. There's
Mhm.
something in a dream. And if we're observant, and when you practice lucid dreaming, you actually practice, you ask yourself, am I dreaming? Am I dreaming? When you're awake, am I dreaming? And you observe little things that happen that are out of the ordinary. And in a sense, I think the UFO experience is analogous to that. Something happened, you can't quite explain it, and here's the opportunity to open yourself up to, there's more to these things than to this world than what we think typically.
Yes. And that leads me to your chapter called Dreaming UFOs. I'm going to read the first paragraph. Note the title to this chapter, Dreaming UFOs. I intended the title to have double meaning. Do we dream of UFOs, or do UFOs dream us into being? And then you were kind enough to include a quote by me in this
Please read
chapter
it. Yeah.
where, oh, read the quote?
Yeah, please. Yeah,
That's
if you don't
nice of
mind.
you. Thank you. Thank you. Uh, I've
I
had,
have it right here.
oh, okay. You want to read it?
Sure, sure.
Okay.
So I'll say, let me just set the stage here. In one dream, okay, um, I often have UFO dreams. I'll get to your part because I
Uh-huh.
think this sets the stage. I've had them all of my life, but in the past few years, I've gotten in the habit of writing them down. In one dream, I saw a long string of UFOs that were connected and moving together horizontally like a cigar shaped galaxy. The first in the line of the UFOs looked like an array of bright white lamp bulbs. This was followed by a string of long pine trees lying sideways. Interesting, right?
Mhm.
All of this was moving across the sky slowly and powerfully. I said aloud, "This is a UFO," to my wife, Ariel, who was suddenly standing next to me. This happens in dreams, right?
Mhm.
When I glared up at the sky, I thought that the phenomena was reflecting back to me the way it thinks I see it.
Yes.
As my friend Sev Tak, experiencer advocate and ufologist, said,
Thank you.
I've had encountered dreams nearly all my life. They were different from traditional dreams, but denied their significance out of fear and confusion. When I had a dream that resulted in red X marks burned into my back, I knew these were not traditional dreams. Encounter dreams have a hazy, multi-dimensional feeling to them. Here are a few signs of an encounter dream. You cannot forget the dream for decades or for the rest of your life because it feels intensely real. Some say more real than this reality. You receive information you have no way of normally knowing, and the dream catapults a profound spiritual shift. Much ET contact happens in an interdimensional state when we are focused on the multi dimensions as we are asleep or in meditation. So that really fits very nicely into, well, I think it does, to what we were saying, that it's this these dreams are they're almost like phone calls.
I
There's
like
that saying, when the phone rings, answer. And it is, I mean, I have intensely real dreams, intensely emotional. And as far as I'm concerned, and I've had people disagree with me on this, and that's fine. To me, they're encounter experiences. In Tibetan yoga, there's the practice of lucid dreaming, because the idea is that if you master lucid dreaming, you also wake up out of the dream of everyday reality, because they're the same. We're caught up in our
Yes.
stories, you know.
Yeah, when I read that in your book, I found that so interesting. It's like practice, right? Like practice for
Yeah.
real life through your
It, it,
dreams.
and you think about it. I mean, I do this. We do this all the time. We go into a story about a coworker, your boss, and you go into a story, and that story usually spins about something about our ego and who we are, and the nerve that that person had to blah de blah blah blah. And it's a story we tell ourselves, and through meditation and through Buddha means awake, right? The awakened one. To wake up out of our daydream of ego kind of lathering. We're lathering up our ego, and to open up to the unconscious, and open up to that bigger world that's peopled, that's ensouled with other beings, and it's not just us. And there's I potentially, I would hope there's the opportunity, just because this world is, I'll say, provisional. And science tells us this, quantum mechanics tells us this, that it's provisional in the sense that there's more space between subatomic particles than there's stuff. The way it's believed now that consciousness is a key ingredient for manifesting, what it is that we see. This doesn't exempt us from being decent people, from being kind. I think it's the opportunity to be more thoughtful, to be more mindful. And I'm not saying I've mastered it. We all have our moments. I'm trying. I'm working on it. For the past, 40 years or so.
Well, yeah, work on it until our last breath, right? Really, it's
True,
ongoing forever. Mhm.
true.
Now, you have a chapter entitled Aliens Like Bluegrass.
Yeah, yeah.
And Mark Turner's story, I know Mark Turner, he's a friend of
Mhm.
mine here in North Carolina. Why did you dedicate a chapter to Mark Turner, and why do you say aliens like bluegrass?
So in this story, I met Mark. I think it was, it's funny because I don't sometimes remember, but I think let me see if I say it here. I think he was in a program called Encounters. He was on a program
Yes.
called Encounters,
Mhm.
and I was fascinated by his story, and so I reached out to him, and then he told me. And he and everyone told me these stories in different ways. Some people spoke them to me, and I wrote them down, transcribed them. Some people wrote things down and we iterated back and forth. So it's various ways it was communicated. But he went to a bluegrass festival and there were kind of anomalous things that happened.
Mm.
And he said that there was clearly a UFO sighting and many people saw it. And I mean, I played with the title that I think what happened is he said later on that there was this strange um, email or he was on some message board and someone wrote about because he was trying to find out did something happen, he was investigating what happened at this thing, and then someone with an email, something like something bluegrass, responded. But there's a lot of bluegrass throughout this book. So I talked about Peter Rowan, who's a bluegrass legend. There were people that played with Peter, people that play with Peter currently, and I'm a huge bluegrass fan, so that kind of wove its way into it. Um, but I put that title on there that,
Mhm.
I think when I was talking to Peter, a question I did an interview with Peter years ago, I wrote a book about that interview developed into a relationship and became a book. And I said to Peter, he played with Bill Monroe. I realized not everyone is maybe into bluegrass, but bluegrass has it's kind of gospel music mixed with ragtime. It's very fast. Um, some people may have an aversion to the sound for whatever reason. But I said to Peter, he left Bill Monroe and he went to play um, psychedelic music. He was young. He was 24 at the time. He left Bill Monroe, this towering giant of American music. And I said, uh, what was that like to leave bluegrass and go play in a psychedelic band? He goes, nothing's more psychedelic than bluegrass. And I thought that was like, wow, what an interesting answer. And he said, it goes by so fast. You have all this instrumentation, and there's a lot of emphasis on virtuosity. So these guys are playing, really fast.
Yeah.
But when you slow it down, if you can hear it, you hear the harmonies, you hear the complexities. And so me being a music geek, I dive into that. I like to hear it. I like to listen. I'll just put on headphones. My wife's like, "You've played that song 20 times already. Can you please?" I use my wife a lot. I talk about it just it's we live together. But she'll
Sweet,
say
yeah.
she'll say, "Could you please not play that song again?" And but that's so for me, Mark's story was interesting and he had a few anomalous experiences, things he couldn't quite they weren't rational. And that was my ask to people is, do you have an experience that is inexplicable that's associated with music? Boom. And then people responded. And as you read, the stories were as various as, it wasn't a one repeated thing.
No, and it's not just UFOs and just ETs either. I mean, it's across the board when it comes to these supernatural experiences. Mike, do you think there is a particular frequency, a particular music that would inhibit your ability to connect with the higher dimensions or
Mm,
could actually hurt society?
mm. That's a great question. If I may, answer, uh, I think there are certain frequencies that are more meditative and more calming. There's that. I don't think there's one answer to this too. Um, Depending upon where you come from, what
Mm.
culture, what time, what was his name? Who was the Salieri said about Mozart? He said,
Oh,
"E too
yes.
many notes, e too many notes." Like it was in Tibetan Tibetan monks. They'll when their music, there's a lot of like clanging and like banging and drums and bells, and not all of it's pretty. And it's in a way it's supposed to be dreadful. They go to charnel grounds to and it's set up, someone has recently died, and it's in a way they elevate the psychological terror of the situation. And then you're supposed to go there and you're supposed to withstand the spirits. You're supposed to be able to you invite them into you. You
Oh,
actually invite them. You say, "Come and eat me, come and rip my flesh
oh
to
my
pieces."
gosh.
But the music that's associated with some of the and again, when I say Tibetan, it's m- I know one Tibetan artist whose music is absolutely beautiful. So it's not monolithically true, but in terms of some of the religious practices, it's almost like it's jarring. Now, maybe
Mm.
can you handle it? Is that what that's all about? Palestrina, it's this beautiful polyphony was considered ugly music. I mean, now we're like, wow, this is great. I love this. This is so calming. So I think it is a relative question, but I think it's a great question. What about the noise of traffic and the noise, the din of information that we get throughout our day? And there's noise happening. There's a hum happening. There's devices, technology that's constantly emitting stuff, and it's probably not great for us. Um,
No. And you know about the Havana syndrome where yeah, so it can be
yeah,
used against us. Uh,
sure,
yeah,
sure.
and,
I mean, it could be used
happening
like torture, in a torturous way.
oh,
So,
yeah.
I mean, and I'm joking a little bit here, but I've been told, please take that off. You're torturing me, you know. But so those are relative things. I took my wife to see Fred Frith. A friend gave me tickets, and this was fascinating music, very experimental. It's avant-garde stuff.
Mm.
There was a violin player and two Fred Frith and another person playing these electronic. Basically, he had a platform where he was playing different kinds of things. Some of it was like magnets that he would like hit the magnet on a mic'd up platform, and it would do this like weird
Mm.
and capture it and synthesize it, put it on a loop. My wife looked at me and she said, after 10 minutes, she goes, "You owe me. You owe me." So for her, it was torture. For me, it was like, wow, that's interesting. That's so cool. I was hearing it like chamber music, but I'm a music geek. So
Yes, so sometimes I like jazz, but sometimes improvised jazz
yeah,
kinda
yeah,
turns me off. Not all of it, but some of it. Why? What is you
yeah,
know what I'm talking about, right?
yeah, totally. Ornette
Why?
Coleman. I went to a concert with Ornette Coleman. Well, they're really stretching credulity. They're stretching. There is no. It's anti-harmony. Um, they're breaking down barriers.
Anti-harmony, that's interesting. And there's
You
no
know, it's
pattern, like, you can't, like
right.
it's, like, all over the place. So,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
maybe our body has a hard time acclimating to something that's not even.
I completely agree, and you look at, like, John Coltrane, there's a book, what was it
Mhm.
called? Ascending or Ascension, and it's this writer talking about jazz and has it John Coltrane, he focuses on, but not just and only, but John Coltrane starts making albums that are very hard to listen to. Now it's just
Mm.
there's no piano player. It's just And but there were politics in that too. When jazz was formulating, it was mostly African American. Um, there definitely were white players playing as well, but it was their thing. And Dizzy Gillespie um, and Charlie Parker had this vocabulary that no one could play. The timings, the way that they were doing it, and in a way, it was sort of like, hey, we can do this, you can't. And of course, over time, more people got involved and began to play, but to some folks, pushing it into a place where it just became noise,
Mhm.
in a way, it alienated the audience. It alienated popular listeners
Yeah,
because now
but
it was
why is it noise for me but not for you? Because 'Cause you're just into it more than I am? Like, why does my body go, "No," or your wife's body was like, "Oh my god,
yeah,
get me out of here," and you're like, "Oh, I'm enjoying this."
yeah. I mean, I think it's mood, and yes, I'm open to it.
Oh, mood.
Sun Ra is another. I mean, he has a whole abduction experience. Sun Ra. He was from Alabama, I think Birmingham, and from a very, he's grown up in, I think, like the 20s. He came from, there's some serious stuff happening there, and he came up. If you see Sun Ra, he dresses up in like Egyptian clothes, and he had a whole story about his abduction, and he was told by the beings that abducted him to make music to teach mankind.
Mm.
Now, Sun Ra, some of his stuff it's literally like, it sounds like a radio that's being turned to, like, in between stations.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's like,
Like and it's dialing us in tune too at the same time.
yeah,
You did
yeah,
talk in the book about research that suggests that we sang before we talked.
yes. Yeah, I thought that, and it's funny, I didn't know that.
Mm.
I wasn't expecting to discover that. And also that, music, it served functions, it is believed, for early humans, um, for, courtship, territorial claims. Um, and what's interesting, as I found out, is that, like I mentioned with dopamine, music, it is believed that music, it had a kind of a capability of actually cleansing. I think it's called the cerebrospinal fluid. They call it detritus. It actually cleans stuff out of the skull. And so when
Mm.
early humans were singing, that it had some kind of it had benefit. And so this act of singing, of um, humming, I mean, they didn't know what who knows, um, but it had a benefit of actually improving the functioning of their brain inside their skull. Even primates I wrote about. So geladas, they do complex vocal sounds. They even kind of have duets. So they'll like duet. Yeah, the way birds may do. It's funny because
Yeah.
you'll hear like, and it's two birds, and they're kind of communicating. I think, and I've said this before, when we understand that, Susan Demeter, Massimo Teodorani's wife, she posted something today that we're looking for non-human intelligence, all over here, but there's so much of it right here.
Yeah.
The way fungus and mycorrhiza operates in the loom of a forest floor, the way birds communicate. Whales have beautiful, melodic, uh, melancholic songs. I think there's something there. I think there's something. When we understand what birds are saying, I think we will have evolved as a species, and maybe then, um, the kind of mess that we're in, if we're, I think that the non-human, the visitors look at us and they say, You guys are kind of dangerous monkeys. You kind of you fight, you have nuclear stuff all over the place. You can't get your act together. When you learn, you know, I'm this is speculation, when you learn how to behave, when you listen to the sounds of birds, when you can understand the species, this teeming life that's all around you, maybe we'll have a more direct conversation with you. Um, that's just
Mhm,
one spoke in the hub. I
mhm,
have a million of other
mhm,
notions about this, but what do you
mhm.
think about that?
Well, I do say that I think we're the juvenile delinquents of the galaxy or the galaxies. That's how I see us, like we're the
Yeah,
troublemakers, and they
yeah.
have to
Yeah.
come and kinda like slap, 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 pull yourself together, which I think is what's happening now through ET contact with the messages that they're giving us.
Hmm.
Would you like to share one of the other stories in your book? We have a few
Sure,
minutes left.
sure.
One of your favorite ones?
Sure. I had to reach out. I through someone I knew, and she said, "You have to speak to Leanne. Leanne has a special relationship with music." I said, "Sure." So I talked to Leanne. She's in the book. She was an epidemiologist, so she's a scientist, right? And she said at some point, and it's funny because these things often have to do with grief, and that's not uncommon to
Oh,
experience
yeah.
the phenomena.
Mm,
People have a near death experience or someone died or
mhm.
the depression or something. It's not uncommon that there's that association. But she was in a relationship that was breaking up, and she said she began to have a special relationship with songs. And then she would, in the way that you may like have a crystal and you have like an object, songs became a part of her apparatus, her spiritual, toolkit. And she was saying that there was one song in particular is like a bridge over troubled water. And she said, I'd never really listened to the song quite like this. And she said, one night I'm driving and I'm going to see my parents. It's torrential downpour in Georgia. And it's just, this, I can't see. And the song comes on the radio. And the song begins, when you're down and you're feeling low. It has this kind of opening like
Mhm,
that.
mhm.
And she said at one point she started to cry because she could not see out the windshield. And she said, God, please show me a sign. And I forget what verse it is, but there's a verse where it upturns towards uplifting, positive. And she said, and the lightning struck and her windshield was completely illuminated.
Ooh.
And she said she saw the sign turn left towards whatever. I mean, that's an interesting thing. And if I may add, she had other stories that kind of associated music with a thing, with something, with a person. She said her porch has become a spaceship. So she goes onto her porch and she is visited by beings who have asked her to sing songs. She says, I have a terrible voice, so I don't know what they're asking me to sing, why they're asking me, but she sings songs for other beings somewhere else. Um,
Okay, that's
Fascinating.
interesting that you just said that because that goes right into my next question.
Mm,
Uh, Sometimes when I meditate, or I'm not even meditating, I could just be walking down the hallway, I have to emit a note or a sound or a tone. I just do. It just comes out of me.
mm,
And in the beginning, I'm like, what the heck did I just do? But now I realize, well, there was something about that sound that I needed to hear. My body, my mind, my soul needed it.
mm.
Do you do that? Do you ever tone when you're meditating or just walking around, just like
Mm.
something comes out of your mouth and you didn't even expect it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, mantras. So, mantras are very powerful. So, if you meditate, just sitting and meditating can be very hard. When I started to use mantras, Om
Yeah.
Mani Padme Om, it
Mhm.
mantras are not supposed to make sense. They're not supposed to be like, they're not supposed to have a literal meaning. What I've learned is that when you hum, by the way, humming, if you're in a bad situation, humming helps you to disconnect from fear, for instance.
Really?
So it sort of shuts down your rational thinking, your that mind, that the roof brain chatter,
Oh,
the monkey mind,
hmm.
and humming has a kind of curative quality. So I do things like that for sure. I mean, I have a drum beat that's going on in my head all the time.
Like right
Um,
now?
well, now that I said it, but usually if I'm it's in between things. Yeah, it's true. My
So
brother, I
there's
would
a soundtrack in your mind,
totally all the
24/7.
time, all the time. It's like, and my friend that I grew up with, Lan, we have the same affliction. There's this constant like, you know, boom, I'm not kidding. It's going on all the time.
How can you even concentrate to write a
Uh,
book? Or maybe that's helping you concentrate. I don't
yeah,
know.
it's the in between because when I'm concentrating, I'm not doing that. I may be
Oh,
playing
okay.
though. So I would play, my brother would, he's 2 years older, and he would clench his teeth and say, "Stop doing that. You're driving me nuts." So and even till today, like we'll get together and and I forget that I'm on the steering wheel. I'm listening to something, I'm tapping it out. So yeah, I have that compulsion to do that.
Mhm.
And just to say, music can be rhythm. So it doesn't necessarily only have to be, and I write about that in the book. It could be rhythm. It could be chanting rhythm. I went to a San Pedro ceremony, and it was this drumming and rhythmic stuff. And man, that was super
Yeah,
transportive.
it
That
just
was the
is something.
intergalactic.
Yeah, drumming. What does drumming appeal to? Like, it's the really basic knowing. It's so interesting. The drumming
Yeah.
can really take you places.
Yeah, Michael, what is it? Harner, I think, has a book, The Shaman's Way, and he talks about that and how drumming, it has this hypnotic, the heartbeat, boom, 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 boom. But drumming has this kind of a quality of,
Primal. It feels
yeah, it's very
primal.
primal.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I like about this book so much is you share so many stories from just normal, average people. And so when you're reading it, you're like, oh my gosh, I can have a supernatural experience too. Like everybody, all of
Hmm.
us can engage in this activity through music. It doesn't have to be music, but music certainly helps. I think it's like a
Absolutely.
shortcut to getting there through music.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm so glad you say that I did want some of the stories to be prosaic. I wanted them to be not extraordinary, and some were. And to have
Yes,
this, this kind of panoply of different kinds,
yes.
and just to say to the, average person out there, you probably have some side capabilities. You haven't plumbed the depths.
Well, I
You
think we all
probably
do.
have some things.
Mhm,
We all do.
mhm.
Sure.
Yeah,
We all
we
do.
all
Yep.
do. And music helps you strengthen your psychic abilities. But it
I
depends
think
what kind of
so.
music you're listening to. So I don't wanna be rude, but is rap gonna take you there?
Well, I wrote about, that in the book. Um, when you think about rap and you think about, and I go back to when I was growing up. So in Long Island City, that was one of the epicenters of rap. Queens was one
Mm,
of the epicenters. I mean, there were other places, Brooklyn, and later on in California. Um, but it's very, you think about like Public Enemy, Fight the Power, and it sounds like a police and ambulance, and now is that transportive to it's not a calming state, it's actually an alarming state.
yes.
And that was part of the point of it, is to say we are under siege. This is we're expressing,
Yeah.
this is the music of revolution. And people that took they took, maybe you didn't have an instrument, so you took an album and you made the album your instrument. So you went, and they used albums to make beats and to sample. I think that was so creative to say, well, I don't have a piano in the house, so I'll just use samples of things, and I'll use the album itself, my scratching the album to make sound. So I think it can be in any which way. It depends on, our openness and the context, and are we willing to explore it? But at the same time, I do understand that not every music is for everyone, and not everybody has a palate for that. And it's like food. I mean, I pretty narrow in my food choices.
Yeah.
I go to the restaurant, I get the same boring, stupid thing. My wife is exotic. She'll try something cool and interesting, and sometimes it'll be terrible. But I get my same, food. But I think music is in a similar way. Um, what are you open to experiencing? Investigate it, look into it.
Yeah, that's a really good way to end our conversation by suggesting that people start listening to music they don't think they would normally listen to. Like classical music, so many people don't listen to classical
Mm,
music,
yeah.
which is superb for helping you transcend and enter the other
Hmm.
dimensions.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because Orfeo Angelucci, James Iandoli had this very similar story, that when they had their encounter experience, they heard some great, something like classical,
Mm.
something gorgeous, beautiful symphonic music. So it's out there if you want to
It
get it.
is out there. Yes, I've heard that music too in a sort of meditation, and I've never heard it on the earth plane.
Mm.
I can't even I write music and I play music and I do all that too. I couldn't even write
Uh,
that or play that. It was something else and I have no words for it, but I've
mm.
never heard it on earth. But it sounds
That's
like normal
fascinating.
music, but it's not. It's something else. It was came
Yeah.
from another realm. All
Yeah.
right, Mike, how can people get in touch with you? Let me put your book up here. How can they
Yeah.
get your wonderful book? I suggest everyone read this book. It's a pretty quick read too. It's an easy read. Uh, you know, I think it would be cool to read a chapter and go to sleep and
Mm.
see how that affects your dream
Affects your
state.
dreams. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or read a chapter and go into a meditation.
I think those are
Something like
great
that.
ideas. And first of all, let me just say thank you. It was a really fun, great conversation, and
Thank
it
you.
was just I love the fact that you read it and you related to it. You
Oh,
could find you can, if you go to MikeFiorito.com. That's Mike and then FIORITO.com. You'll see all of the books that I've done. You can order
mhm.
from there. I have a link. You can also, I do have some books on hand that if someone is interested to get it, and for all we know, I do have some books on hand that I could ship directly. The book will officially publish February 1st, which is Saint Bridget's Day. So she was an Irish saint, and she was known to be interested in, fairy lore and folk culture and this kind of stuff. So
Hmm.
there's a certain affinity I have for her. But yeah, those are, you can find
Mhm.
this at, it goes through Ingram, which is the distributor that pushes out to all of the services that you may buy books on. But if you have any questions, please, I'm happy to get back to you. I'd love to hear what folks think. So
Would you like to hear from people who've had a supernatural experience through music, or you don't want to hear from people anymore?
no, I'm happy to hear. I'm on a
Okay.
project, and it's sort of it's not gelled really what I'm doing with it, but it's connecting the UFO experience to spirituality, to
Yeah.
metaphysics,
Yeah.
to mystical experiences. So if you, yeah, please reach out to me, and would love to chat with you. You can communicate via the website.
Okay. Wonderful. I love the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone who's watching and listening. We're very grateful.